Here's Jeff Paterson, our Canucks reporter, one half of the Rink Wide team with Andrew Wadden in the studio, in the Go-Goat Sports studio. Good afternoon.
I am here in person. This is me. Hi.
Yeah, good to see you. Answer me the poll. Given fair return, you support a Horvat trade?
Sure. I think I'm ready to see this core touched. And as much as I like and respect Bo Horvat and absolutely enjoying the production that he is putting up this year, I just wonder if his value would never be higher.
Right.
I'm not sure. He's not. I mean, I am pretty sure that he's not going to keep this level of scoring up through the trade deadline. So, yeah, this group just doesn't work. For whatever reason, this mix isn't right. I think that's apparent. A win in Buffalo notwithstanding, it doesn't change the noise levels around this team. It doesn't change the issues that this team is facing. And so, I was on trade JT Miller. I was on that train.
Yep.
They elected to go otherwise, but now it kind of feels inevitable that at some point they're going to have to pull the trigger on a trade for the captain.
Not often can you rent a Canadian captain from that rare upper cupboard. You know, the guy with the character, the guy with the drive. Remember how good he was in the bubble, so there's a little bit of a playoff pedigree that's known there. And, his cap hit is still very manageable. So I've heard a lot of people say, oh, he'll get more value when his cap is not as big towards the trade deadline. His cap's not that big for what he's giving you right now. My goodness, if he slots into a contender's third-line center role, like, oh my God, that's a pretty stacked team.
A lot of teams are capped out, so I think that's where the cap concerns come into play. But you're quite right that his ticket is pretty good for given the value you're getting here at 14 goals, second in the league.
Sure, and I think it narrows the field even more so that it's generally the good teams that are capped out. I know the Canucks are capped out too, but in terms of the teams that would be acquiring, like Anaheim's not looking to get their hands on Bo Horvat, and I don't think Bo Horvat probably has designs on going to Anaheim. And so it's tricky, but you're right. I mean, even at full freight for this year, it's not an unmanageable task. And those were the same things that we said about JT Miller, that if teams wanted him for 2 playoff runs, taking him on for what was left of 5 1/4 for a good team that had a little bit of cap flexibility, in hindsight, it still makes sense. The argument makes sense, but nobody was willing to step up, or the Canucks didn't like the offers that they were getting for JT Miller, and so they elected to commit to him. And now, Bo's future is uncertain, and credit to him. Like, he really has handled this thing like a champ. And if anybody thought that it was going to distract him, I mean, the proof is irrefutable now with the 14 goals. And I think I said to you guys yesterday when I thought the game in Buffalo was his most complete game yet. And so there may be some detractors that just say, hey, this guy's on a heater. It happens. But it doesn't change the fact that he's not a great penalty killer. You know, he's not a puck distributor and a playmaker. I thought the other night in Buffalo, he was all those things. And that is good for him. And maybe it's good for the Canucks, because maybe if he can have a few more games like that, just round out his game a little bit more, maybe it does make him that much more attractive to even a handful of teams. If you could create some sort of bidding war, or at least get a couple of competing offers for his services. I just don't want the Canucks to operate in any kind of vacuum where they're dealing with one team only, put the blinders on, and then try to make the best deal possible from there. I would like to see them broaden the field here.
Well, there's no trade or movement protection here, so they should have a variety of suitors on Bo Horvat. Now, I think we're talking rental. The sign and trade is so very rare in the National Hockey League. There's a complexity there that would have to come together to make that a thing. So I think you're looking at trading him, at least initially, as a pure rental. The acquiring team may be looking at re-signing him before free agency. As a pure rental, Blake and I had our 2 cents in the opening segment. What do you think he's worth?
Oh, that's difficult. I mean, the market always changes, but we know that the lead dog as a rental generally fetches a pretty nice price. And a 34-year-old Claude Giroux last year got, a first-rounder and Owen Tippett, who was himself a first-rounder in his day.
Was kind of fading a little
fair
bit,
enough,
but
just on the surface at the very least. So, I mean, you'd love to think that there would be a first rounder, a roster player, maybe a prospect in there as well.
It was Tippett a first, a third. There were other pieces involved there, including a former first that went back to Florida. So it was a little bit more complicated. Blake and I both said an early 20s NHL player and a first round pick or top prospect. Something you got to think about right?
Yeah, and I mean, how many times have we heard Jim Rutherford talk about his 25 to 26-year-old sort of age range or younger than that? So seemingly you'd want somebody that fits that criteria. And then the first rounder, the problem is if you're dealing with an acquiring team that's got legitimate hopes of winning the Stanley Cup, first rounder is probably going to be deep in the draft, but it's still a first rounder. And I would think that's the bare minimum for the Canucks, just in terms of saving face. I mean, this is their captain. This is a guy that has carried a ton of water for this group. And it's funny, when I think about Horvat, I just think of, everybody knows him, but low maintenance, pretty structured, pretty rigid and regimented guy. I'm sure in a perfect world, Bo would love to have his next 8 years laid out in front of him. The idea of being a rental is, it's kind of like the amusement park ride. Like, that doesn't strike me as Bo's preferred way of operating in this. I think he would like the long-term extension and know what his future holds. A rental, you're packing up, you're living out of a hotel for better part of 3 or 4 months if all goes well and the team that gets you is able to go on a long playoff run. And so there's certainly some uncertainty that comes along with that for the player, but that's also the business that he's in, and I think he's had plenty of time to contemplate all of the options that await him, because it just doesn't look like his future is here in Vancouver.
Park ride. I mean,
twists and turns and humps and bumps.
Does Bo not like roller coasters? He's got long experience here in Vancouver of riding one.
Well, that's true too. That is true.
I don't often do the trade proposals here. I've got a trade proposal for you
listen
guys.
to this.
Yeah, rarefied air here.
Oh, wow.
Because I think Bo Horvat's a Toronto Maple Leaf.
Oh, wow. Hot takey here. Listen to this.
Bo Horvat and Tyler Myers. Huge need. I mean,
didn't you hot take this yesterday or earlier in the week?
I just said that he's going to be elite. But here's the way it happens. Horvat and Myers, and they need defensemen badly in Toronto as well.
That's because of injuries, right?
Yeah. Nylander and Kerfoot coming the other way, with $1 million retained for Vancouver on Myers.
So Myers turns into a $4 million player?
$5 million.
Or $5 million.
So the cap hits now are a wash after all is said and done.
Oh, okay, you've worked out the cap hits.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
And
Who is it? Nylander
and Kerfoot and Kerfoot's expiring contract for Bo and Myers, and you get a first-round pick in 2024. You have to wait.
All right. I was waiting you out there because I was hoping there was some sort of goodie at the end of all of that. Because if Kerfoot's on an expiring contract, no guarantee that he's here beyond the end of the season.
No guarantee you want him here. But
and
yeah,
fair enough, there's that.
Yeah.
Obviously, Nylander is the piece in the here and now that steps in.
Get a couple years of him.
It doesn't do anything to address the Canucks' biggest need, and that's the concern, I suppose, because how many times I come on with you guys and say, the Miller trade, it has to address that right D.
It gives you cap space to deal with that. That's
Yep.
what it does for the summer. That's
Well,
all. That's
it
all.
gives you an asset too in Willie Nylander to potentially get that. Not to mention, I think
First
you can
round pick
move
too. Yep.
Kerfoot on and get something else, or
Is it crazy from either side though?
No, I wouldn't think it's crazy.
No.
Well, let's address what Saravelli dropped today, and that is that there's some smoke with the Columbus Blue Jackets, who do have right shot defensemen, pedigreed right shot defensemen. In fact, 3 young ones. Adam Boquist, who was he a top 10 pick? I think he was close to it. Yeah, 8th overall pick in 2018. David Jiricek, who was a top 10 pick this year, a right shot defenseman. And then that Alberta Junior Hockey League guy who's off to Wisconsin, Solmans, who was a first-round pick a couple of years back. He is also a right-handed defenseman.
My surface-level reaction to that is just from Bo Horvat's perspective. After all that he's been through here,
Yes, no, I don't.
to wind up in Columbus, which
would have to be
Johnny
with an
Hockey picked
extension.
as a destination.
Right.
So it can happen, and it has been done. But I just think for Bo, out of the fire and into the frying pan of struggles when it comes to, I do wonder about Columbus. Are they ever going to turn a corner? And I know we've asked that question here in Vancouver over the last decade, but they've tried things. They convinced Johnny Hockey. They get Line A to resign. Obviously, he's been banged up twice already this season. But yeah, I mean,
And of course, they'd have to re-sign Horvat. Not that he links specifically Horvat to Columbus, but that would have to be a sign and trade.
I think for them it would have to. I mean, they're not obviously getting in on a deal where Bo could just say, no thanks, I want to go elsewhere. So I do think that's where the sign and trade would have to come into play. But yeah, like that's the kind of team, looks like it needs to shake up its mix yet again, but a team that has a commodity that the Canucks certainly covet. And we're getting to that point in time already, and not even at the 20-game mark. But, when the Canucks were winless in 7 and people were screaming from the highest mountains to blow it up, well, 7 games into the season, there are no trading partners, right? Like, no other team was feeling what the Canucks were feeling and going through. As you get to the 20-game mark, it becomes apparent the separation, and Columbus looks like, despite signing Johnny Hockey and thinking that maybe this was the year, it ain't the year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I on a couple of levels, I could see why, there may be more than smoke.
Maybe
there.
you have to take Jack Roslovic back from them in order to clear some of the cap space there.
Who was a healthy scratch, and I've already heard Gavrikov, the fine Russian defender, there may well be moved by Columbus. Let's move on to the building. Remember that? Yeah. Rogers Arena?
Haven't been there for a while.
Yeah.
Out on the road and the road-heavy start to the schedule.
They took the players' photos down from inside the inner bowl. They replaced it with Rogers, which, as we were talking about, I don't dispute that Rogers gets some messaging, some space inside the bowl as part of their new deal, but it's an awful lot of Rogers banners there when you typically use that space to promote players and your own brand. Interesting.
Yeah, I think if you play the old something or nothing game, I don't think it's not nothing. They've had the players' pictures there. Before that, it was the colorful history,
bright future.
And that was a great campaign. And,
yes, it was.
And it was eye-catching just because of all the colors and the color schemes that they've used. But, nobody is going to that building and forgetting which giant telecom has the naming rights. They're on top of the scoreboard. I believe they're in the ice as well. And I think by now we all know whose name is on there. So for them to get this primary real estate up there, it does feel like just a convenient way to use that space so that they're kind of protecting their butts. The hockey club I'm talking about here, in the event that they start to strip.
It's just a holding card,
And we do this a little bit too. Placeholder, a little bit of bonus for a good sponsor.
Yeah.
Throw them a little something extra that isn't in the contract. Interesting. Because as we know, Jeff, and we were reminiscing a little bit, whether it was Hamhuis or Virtanen, there were people whose images were up there long past when they forgot. Up there around.
I always got a kick out of they separated. They had the 2 banners at either end, all the most recent iteration. The one was Demko, Hughes, and Paterson, the 3 guys that all had their contracts done. The 3 that were at the other end were, at one point, it was Miller, Besser, Horvat. And
according to status, yes.
2 of them got their contracts, and then there's Bo. But it always kind of seemed funny that somebody should have stenciled in some money bags or something on that one, just the way that those 3 guys were lumped together.
Friday nights are usually pretty fun, happy crowds at Rogers Arena. You're heading into the weekend. It tends to be a good bit of booze going on there on a Friday night. Does the building get ugly tomorrow if the team is ugly?
Did you say booze? Yeah. There will be some, and there may be some.
Very good.
Yeah, I mean, it's got the potential. Again, I think that the Buffalo home opener was the perfect storm. They came off the road winless. They had squandered these leads. They were in the game into the third period. Home openers are supposed to be celebrations, and then the Sabres pulled away in the third period, and it was just like, enough's enough. Fans have spent their money. They're going to send a message. There have been some other grumblings, and I know you were at the Anaheim game, the Nashville game, when ultimately they flushed a 3-0 lead. There's frustration. People booed the hockey club, but nothing at the levels that we saw in the home opener. And I do think the home opener was just sort of a perfect storm in and of itself. Now, they have won a few games. They have, their best players are performing. I'm not saying it can't get off the rails, but I'm certainly not going to the game on Friday night expecting that, that's going to be the storyline. I wonder, first of all, how the game plays out, because we know that the Canucks, when they have had limited success this year, it's been in these run and gun, outscore your opponents. You saw what LA did to Edmonton last night. Basically just the old boa constrictor and sort of squeezed the life out of them. That's not, I don't think that lends itself to any sort of success for the Vancouver Canucks. They have played so few low-scoring games. The one that they did recently in Toronto, they got off to the good start there and then let it get away. So I'm kind of curious if it's a low-scoring, low-event, dull kind of game. Does that just soften the tone in some way in the building? That there's just not a visceral reaction one way or the other.
Well, I was going to ask you what you think, if any, Bruce Boudreau does in terms of changes to the lineup, because that's not really available to him potentially. He can't ask this group to play like that. I don't know that he knows how to ask that group to play that like that, or B, has the horses to make it actually happen. Does he just hope upon hopes, especially against a team like LA, who's not exactly outside of Jonathan Quick and Andrzej Kopitar and Drew Doughty, they're not cup ready. They're going to be fallible as well. Does he just say, my only chance is to win this game 5-4, so that's how we're going to try and win it?
I'm not sure that they go into those games thinking that, but I think they also recognize that they are who they are and they don't defend very well. And so you're right. The Kings still have this old guard, but they have added some speed. I mean, Adrian Kempe's one of the fastest guys in the league, and then they added Kevin Fiala in the offseason. I think the Kings want to believe that they've got a little bit more giddy up in their game than perhaps some of their opponents. We know that the Canucks still don't think that they're a quick team, and that's pretty apparent on a lot of nights. So Canucks are going to have to find a way to keep Trevor Moore in check after his hat trick last night.
How about that, huh?
Yeah. But this is the thing for me, and I think I floated this one other time when the Canucks were, I was going to say when they were really bad, not that they've emerged from their early season slumber. But if there is any kind of glimmer of hope that they can scratch and claw their way back into the race in the West, is the fact that they've seen so little of their conference opponents. I think it's 12 of the first 17 have been against Eastern opponents. It's the way it works, the 2 Eastern road trips, but also the teams that have come through Vancouver. So they've played 5 conference opponents. They're 2-1-2. They've got points off 4 of those 5 teams. I'm not sitting here telling you that this is how it's going to happen and it starts tomorrow night against the Los Angeles Kings. But if you're the Canucks and you're looking for things to grasp onto and you're looking for ways to try to build some hope and belief, it is that ultimately the path to the playoffs for every team is to be better than the teams that you're battling with. And the Canucks just haven't battled with many of those teams yet. So they still have a Western Conference heavy schedule in front of them. It starts tomorrow, but it's also a tough schedule. I mean, the Kings are, they may not be Stanley Cup contenders, but they're certainly well ahead of the Canucks right now in the standings. That's a good win for them last night in Edmonton. And then it's Vegas, and it's Colorado, and it's Vegas again. So, I think we're going to continue to find out that, unless there's been some incredible transformation here coming off the road, that who the Canucks are is who the Canucks are, and they're going to struggle to win their share of games here in the short little while because of the level of opponent they're facing.
If they are to climb Mount Everest, though, the one thing they can't do is give away loser points to the other team, too. And you just said, in the 5 games, 2 of them have gone past 60 minutes. If the other teams are going to win 2 points outright in their other games, you can't give them 1 point just for showing up.
Well, and especially against the division opponents. And there has only been 3 this year. Edmonton on opening night, they lost. They beat the Seattle Kraken. Of course, they beat the Anaheim Ducks. And, of course, L.A. and Vegas are division opponents. And the other thing, generally, is the conference and the division don't look very good.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I mean, there's some real surprises below the playoff bar. I would lump the Canucks in that category just for how bad they've been off the hop here. I know that the debate raged whether they were going to be a playoff team, but I don't think many people thought that they were going to be bottom feeders, and here they are. But you're right. I mean, you look at the teams that made the playoffs last year, and I don't have the standings in front of me, but Nashville and Minnesota and the Calgary Flames.
Nashville in 97 was the last one in, so that was a really good conference last year.
And Minnesota was going to take a step back, but they were a 113-point team last year, and they have sort of, scuffled out of the gate themselves and have had some injury issues to deal with. And so you're right. It's not like the conference is pulling away from them, or the division is pulling away from them. And I'm not sure, as good as Seattle has been to start relative to last year, I'm still not sold that over the long haul that the Seattle Kraken are one of the 3 divisional teams when all is said and done here in the Western Conference. Even the Edmonton Oilers, we didn't mention them, but
if you're a glass half full person,
it's there.
Seattle you mentioned, and then San Jose, Chicago, Arizona are all still ahead of them, and I'm just not sure they have staying power either.
Right.
Now, you still got to get ahead of more. There's still a handful of teams that I think they got to jump 7 teams as it stands right now, but more than half of that field, or just less than half of that field, could be pretty surmountable when it's all said and done.
And yet, to bring the conversation full circle here, and we had these conversations because we thought it was going to be JT Miller, but now replace Bo Horvat. This idea of trying to make up ground, be relevant, be in the mix, and then subtract one of your best players. Those two things don't necessarily jive. So we can sort of build a path for them to get back into the mix, but all of a sudden it feels like at some point they're going to subtract.
Probably need those players, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it is difficult.
Maybe Curtis Lazar tomorrow night and Will Lockwood for an encore.
Well, and I saw Riley Stillman was skating with Tyler Myers. This is after Kyle Burroughs fights in Boston, does Kyle Burroughs things, is out there, plays the most minutes in the third period, locking down a win. They get it right, and they get their 2 points in Buffalo, and then he comes home, and he's now back on a 4th pairing, and I don't get it, and it really does make me wonder who's calling the shots here. Bruce talks up Burroughs every opportunity he gets, talks about how much he loves this guy as a player, and did a lot of good things the other night in Buffalo, and now at the first practice back, and he's on the outside looking in, so you do wonder if somebody above Bruce is saying, we acquired this guy, we got to keep playing him here. It seems ridiculous to think, but...
Podkolzin plays too, right?
If he's able. I know that he had the big black eye and had the full bubble.
But he played hard today in practice by all accounts. Won the shootout drill at the end of practice.
You would think, although he's been a healthy scratch once and hasn't performed particularly well, still goalless as he approaches the 20-game mark. And... yeah, I liked what I saw from Will Lockwood. Do I want to see more? Sure, but do I want to see more of Will Lockwood at the expense of Podkolzin or Höglander is the question. And, big picture questions for the organization. Is Will Lockwood a better player than Nils Höglander, who just can't seem to stay in the good graces of the head coach here, but was a higher draft pick, had better pedigree, certainly has an NHL bottom line to his name that Will Lockwood doesn't. Yeah, Lockwood played well the other night in isolation. I'll give him credit for that, but I do wonder about Will Lockwood staying in, and if he does, at whose expense?
Tomorrow you have to keep Lockwood in after that game. I mean, he did everything you asked of him. He played 4 more minutes than Höglander, who was a -3. Guys, at some point, I think Höglander's got to be in Abbotsford at some point.
Maybe.
If Lockwood continues to play well, I wonder whether the next step is, Nils, you go play 18 minutes a night, 20 minutes a night in Abbotsford in all situations.
Yeah, but you're going to need to see Lockwood over several games.
Exactly. Well, Lockwood, of course, Podkolzin, as he mentions, is in this mix as well.
Oh,
but it's funny, I had totally forgotten, because I think on Rink Wide, Andrew and I were floating this idea of Abbotsford, and should they use the farm team better, and the farm team's out east right now, lost in Laval, so it's not like you can just send them down the highway because they're out east and the Canucks are home. I had totally forgotten, and I was reminded online that they sent Podkolzin down to the AHL for those 2 playoff games at the tail end.
Yeah.
Totally had slipped my mind, and the playoffs were like a blip, and they went by in a hurry. And so he has touched the AHL at that level. I don't know that it'll happen for him, but I do wonder, we all watched Höglander. We were awed by Höglander in his rookie season. I mean, this guy took the Canucks in training camp and made this team and took it by storm. And, there's a player there who has sort of faded away, and different coaches, although, Travis Green certainly had his thoughts on Höglander defensively. Bruce has aired those views repeatedly. And you're right, you saw the other night, it wasn't a great game defensively. That third line essentially became the fourth line and was parked. I'm curious, you threw some names out there, the way they were skating again, Brock Besser's on that third line. How is that a path to get Brock Besser going? Whether it's Curtis Lazar coming back off injury, and Lazar's not a playmaker. His career high is 15 points in the NHL. Sheldon Dries is certainly not known as any kind of playmaker. And here you've got the $6.5 million guy without a goal as the team nears the 20-game mark. And you just wonder, where does it go? Where does it go from here for Brock Besser.
Daniel Sedin feeding Besser for one-timers in practice. That maybe will help a little bit. By the way, Rob Williams with some good reporting too. Bo Horvat switched his stick this season to a softer, whippier stick. I wonder if that explains a lot of the good luck.
Seen a couple of goals, including the one in Buffalo the other night, but there was one against Pittsburgh where he came down the right side and looked like he was going to pass, and then just like really with the flip of a wrist, like leaned into and got a ton on a shot that bar down on Matt. It wasn't Matt Murray, it was Tristan Jarry. But there have been a couple of examples that make you think that
a lot of these stars are using softer sticks these days
because
they're not breaking anymore. They've found a way to keep them whippy but not break, and it's benefiting Horvat.
Marvelous stuff, Jeff. We'll listen to Rink Wide. Thank you for this. Catch up on Monday.
All right, guys. Thank you.